Hey there, this is Mr. Kaufman from High Five History giving you a brief overview of the growth of medieval towns. So thinking back to the early Middle Ages, we know that most Europeans lived on feudal manors, where peasants or serfs lived on the feudal manors of their lords, whether they be nobles or monarchs. Life was very separated. Trade was reduced for the fear of invaders such as the Vikings, and Europe kind of stagnated a little bit. But in this presentation, we're going to see how that began to change, how feudal manors turned into towns, and then how that led to what we now know as modern Europe. So here we have a map of Paris, which started off as a feudal manor, grew up then to a town and then later a city. And you can see centered around a river, always an important feature of any civilization. So the growth of towns, again, usually located along waterways such as rivers, and the basic reason is it made trade easier. Still, even today, in 2015, the easiest and most efficient way to trade goods is with water, because you can carry a lot of weight a lot easier, and you can take advantage of natural power such as wind to be able to move your goods. Now, what led to the growth of towns was really a surplus of food. Improved agriculture allowed more food to be grown in less space, and it allowed fewer people to be able to grow enough food for the entire village, which then meant other people could do something else. With that, again, it starts up a revival of trade. Trade starts to pick up. Towns start to specialize in certain goods. And with that specialization, trade increases, and more people again become residents of these towns, and it grows up. Now, for some cases, in order for towns to gain their independence from their feudal manors, sometimes there were violent fights where the people living on the manor would violently win their independence from their local lord. And then in other cases, they were able to purchase charters from the king. So they'd be able to ask the king for permission to start their own town, to govern themselves, of course, under the watchful eye and under the control of the king. And the king would grant them a charter, a permission to start their own town. Now, what were towns like? So one of the things that you would see in a town were craftsmen, skilled workers. And when you put a bunch of skilled workers together, they would form these organizations known as guilds. Here's an image of a cobbler's guild, a group of shoemakers. Now, a guild, again, is an organization or group of workers that have the same craft or trade. Stonemason, people who cut stone and carve stone to then use in buildings. Cobblers, like I just said, who would make shoes. Now, what would they do? They made sure that their members were treated fairly. They would set prices so that that there would be a minimum standard of living for all the cobblers in that town. They also would help train each other to make sure that the quality of goods stayed high. So that way, if you went to a certain town to buy shoes, all the shoes would be of high quality, and it would build up the town's reputation. Now, with the rise of guilds, also came the rise in trade and commerce. So here again is an image of a medieval marketplace, and you can see it's a bustling, busy place, crowded with people selling goods, food, clothing, cloth, specialty items. Now, in the early Middle Ages, trade was rare, Only the nobles and monarchs were able to trade, and it was mostly in luxury goods. But in the Middle and High Middle Ages, normal people started trading, for everyday goods. So instead of having to make and grow everything on the feudal manor, they would be able to go to the market to get food. They'd be able to go to the market to trade for shoes and clothing and such. Now, with that, merchants began to gain wealth. So you can see now the beginning breakdown of the feudal system, where it wasn't just the lords and nobles who had the power, but merchants, people that would have been peasants a few generations before, now gained wealth. They ended up gaining power as well, being on town councils and helping to shape the laws and the rules of the market end of the town. Now, not everyone in medieval Europe was treated fairly. We know that Jews in these times were discriminated against, and there was definitely hostility and prejudice towards Jews, and sometimes that would lead to violence. It made it hard for them to make a living, right, to earn a living. And what's something that's interesting is at this time, Christianity forbid, right, the banking, essentially, right? Christianity said that to loan money for interest was a sin. So who ended up being the bankers? Right? Jewish people ended up being the bankers. And that was one of their few places in society where they actually were able to sort of carve out a space for themselves. Moving on to medieval homes. Now here's an image of a medieval street, and you can see very narrow, not paved, so that the street would have been made out of dirt, animals right in there. Normally it would have been busy and bustling with people, like the last image of the marketplace. The second floor is jutted out, right? They hung over, making it even darker in the street. Now, medieval homes were small and crowded. The homes of wealthy would have been much larger, but for most people, right, you would have had one single room where you would have had a lot of people living there. Most homes were made out of wood. Now, because this, people had to grow up really fast, right? A high rate of child death. About half of children would die from basic diseases. And therefore, when you became, 7, 8, 9 years old, you started your adult life. So life really moved a little bit quicker then. There was not much of a childhood. Now for girls, their role mostly was in the house, cooking, making cloth, essentially making sure that the home was being taken care of. They would marry young and begin raising children right away. Now if you were from a wealthy family and you were a girl, you did have additional opportunities. You could learn how to read and play music. You might learn how to paint, so you would have some hobbies as well. Now, disease and medicine. Here's one that makes you very grateful to live in the 21st century. Here you have an image of medieval medicine, the use of herbs and oils to cure diseases. Now, it's key to understand that medieval Europe was dirty. Hygiene was, not heard of. They would throw trash out in the streets or into the local waterway. Because of that, animals were everywhere, including rats. And where there are rats, there are disease. Things like the Bubonic Plague, right, were centered on this fact that it was just a dirty place. And because of that, again, disease would run rampant. Measles, cholera, scarlet fever, the Bubonic Plague, just to list a few of the diseases. Again, that'll sort of caused only half the kids to make it to age 7. Now, medieval doctors, again, making you feel very grateful to live in the 21st century. Medieval doctors would believe in things such as prayer or magic, some use of basic herbal medicines. Bloodletting was a common technique to cure disease. So if you were sick, the idea was that if we bloodlet, meaning if we take your blood out, that would take out the disease. So they would use leeches or sometimes cut their patients. Often this would lead to death, right? You would overbleed someone and they would die. Other things that they would take a look at your astrological sign and see the alignment of the stars and the planets to help determine your sickness or how to cure you. So definitely not a great time to be sick. Crime and punishment. Another thing that makes you feel grateful to live in the 21st century. Here we have an image of someone held up in the stocks. So for a minor crime, you'd be publicly humiliated by being put into the stocks at the center of the town. Now, in addition to being publicly humiliated, it would be quite uncomfortable. If you can imagine sitting in that position for a day, 2 days, even 3 days, you can see it would be quite uncomfortable as well as embarrassing. So, crime and punishment. There were a couple ways to determine someone's guilt. One way was trial by ordeal. So if you were accused of a crime, you might have to pass a dangerous test to determine you're innocent or your guilt. One of the examples, which again makes me feel grateful to live in the 21st century, is they would throw you into a well. And the idea is that the water would either accept you or reject you. Now, if the water accepted you, meaning you drowned, you'd be innocent, right? But you would have drowned, so you would have been in a bad position. And if the water rejected you, meaning if you were able to float and swim, then you'd be considered guilty. So either way, if you got the water test, you were in trouble. Other ways is you could choose to fight for your innocence. So again, that would be a trial by ordeal. Again, for minor crimes, you'd be punished by being put into the stocks, being whipped or fined. If you were accused of a more serious crime, you could be hanged, burned at the stake. A lot of torture methods going on in the Middle Ages. Again, not a great time to live if you're causing any trouble. Now, slowly, though, you do get the rise of royal courts, right, where kings would appoint judges to decide someone's innocent or guilt. And this gave the rise to common laws, meaning judges would take ideas from before them, right, rules and kind of general laws that had come from before them, and enact them. And then those would become then common laws for the future generations of judges to follow. And what ends up happening is this replaces then the trial by ordeal or by combat. So again, in this rise of towns, you do get an improvement on crime and punishment. And finally, wrapping up medieval towns, leisure and entertainment. So again, we know in the early Middle Ages and feudalism, very few people had an opportunity for leisure and entertainment, mostly just the monarchs and the nobles. But it starts to spread now to the common people. A game here brought over from the Middle East and from the Muslim world was chess, right? Still played today, and a game of the medieval Europe. Now, if you were a child, you might have played with dolls or toys such as wooden swords or hobby horses. A common game was rolling hoops, where you take a stick and you would get the hoop rolling down the street. Things like bowling as well as badminton. There was board games, chess and checkers, backgammon, card games, as well as dancing was popular as well. Soccer, or the beginnings of soccer, was actually very dangerous because the ball they would play with was very hard, and people would have head injuries. So much so where in some towns they would outlaw the play of soccer. Now, in addition to all these games, you also had the rise of plays, and they had this thing called mystery plays where they recreated stories from the Bible. These plays dramatized, right, the story of the saints and might be performed, right, where the market was or the town square. And again, this would give access to entertainment for not just the nobles, not just the monarchs, but for everyone. And that is it. That's your brief overview of medieval towns and the growth of towns in medieval Europe. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any, if you missed any parts, just go back and rewatch it.